So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Photoshop and talk about what the intended lecture is for today, which is composition and lighting. So jumping in here to Photoshop. Actually, before we do this, I have a PDF here I'd like to talk about. And this is where we're going to discuss some of the things you should consider as you're putting your digital map painting together. And just using these examples here that I have in the student gallery, you can kind of see that some careful consideration was put into the layout of all of these different compositions. As you can kind of see here, I'll just scroll through them. Different things that students were thinking about as they were compositing these digital map paintings were things like foreground and background, which is very important. If something is in the foreground and closer to you, naturally that object will be larger. If something is further away, that object will be smaller. So make sure you consider that as you're placing in these photos that are coming from all kinds of different places, and they may be at different sizes. So the scale of things is important. The other thing you need to keep in mind is the lighting. And if you look at some of these, once you start compositing different photos from different locations, like one photo may be taken outside in bright light, another photo may be taken inside in kind of a dark situation, some photos may be perfectly lit. You're going to have a mixed bag of different lighting situations. You're going to need to work on making the lighting consistent. Like you can kind of see in this one here, I know he had to composite several cityscape scenes to get this sort of feel here, but each one that he brought into the composition had a different lighting scenario. So he had to work on adjusting the lighting or the darkness or the lightness of the image so that it all fit together and it looked seamless. And that's really what you're working on mostly on these projects, is trying to make these scenes that you're creating, these environments or fantasy scenes, as believable as possible and as real as possible. And trying to do that using Photoshop, clean masking techniques, clean selections are all part of being able to achieve that. Let's see, let's scroll down here. The other thing that I'm going to do in demo today is talk about shadows. And if you sort of look at this composition right here, you'll see that this student, once he brought all these figures into this digital map painting, he had to consider bringing in the shadow of each figure to make it more believable. And in order to determine the direction of the shadow, you first have to figure out where your light source is coming from. And it's hard for me to demonstrate this without being in a classroom and pointing, but I'm going to try with my pointer. Looking here at this example right here, and looking at the shadows that the student casts from these figures, you can sort of guess that the light source is probably coming from this direction somewhere. And it's beaming down on the side that you're not seeing of these figures, and then hence the shadow is cast in front of the figures. So those are some things you need to think about as you're putting together your composition. Here's another one here. I think the interesting thing about this one is the kind of almost dawn or dusk lighting situation, where you can sort of see over here on these branches that there is sort of a cast of light as if a sun was setting of some kind, or this kind of shadowed sun back here is casting a unique light source onto this tree. And you can sort of see how there are some odd shadows that are cast here in the snow from these grave sites to make it believable, to make it feel like it's a real scene. Now over here on this one, this particular student probably could have taken this a bit further and maybe worked a little more on some shadow technique on this figure here, this mannequin, because I think it's flat looking in the composition, and you can kind of see the difference between what's happening here with this mannequin sitting in this room and these figures standing here. These actually look more believable, like they were actually in the scene, because he cast all the shadows here, where this mannequin seems flat, almost placed and floating in the scene. So you can sort of see the difference between what you get when you actually take the time to cast shadows versus when there is no shadow. It gets that sort of flatness kind of going. So keep in mind that you need to consider those things as you're working on these matte paintings. And we're going to look at a quick shadow technique here next. But I just thought these student examples were some great ones that were done. This student here, I believe she did use some brush techniques, and she used some textures and some really interesting filters to get some of the effects that she was able to get here on this digital matte painting. Thought it was a pretty interesting one. So take a look at the student gallery and get inspired. All right, so we'll jump back here. It's only 15 minutes to do this, so we're going to quickly try and go through this. All right, what I have over here, and I believe I did not go back. So if I didn't explain to you one of the most important features of Photoshop that I find that I can't live without is the history panel. And the history panel, if you haven't already discovered it, is this panel here. It's this icon that has 3 squares and an arrow. If you click it, I'm hovering over it there. If I click it, that's my history panel. And what the history panel does is it keeps track of all of the different things, or techniques that you do, or the different areas that you go, and all of the different things that you've done to a specific file. It keeps track of it while you're in that session. Once you close the file, you lose your entire history. But if you haven't closed it, you can still look back and you can see what you had done to create a specific technique in Photoshop. So it's kind of handy. So what I did here is I actually did this whole demo before, right before this lecture, and I captured this and printed it out so that I don't forget to do it exactly verbatim, because there's so many steps sometimes in Photoshop to get to a specific application that it's hard to remember all of the different steps that you took to get there. So the history panel can be a great tool for that. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out everything that I did here by just going all the way back to square one. And you can kind of see it grayed out everything, and we're going to start from scratch. So let me explain what I have here. For this demonstration, I have this final file down here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use this file up here and this file over here, and what we're going to create is this right here. This is the final piece. And what I've done is I don't like this sky. I think it's too gray, and I wanted a bluer sky. And then I have this flower that I brought in here, and I've cast a shadow on the side of this mountain, so the flower doesn't look like it's floating there. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did that, and hopefully you can find these features useful for your digital matte paintings. Okay? All right, so let's come on up here and let's begin. First, we're going to grab the magic wand tool here, and as I said before, I like the classic tools. There's a million ways to do this, but I prefer to do it with the magic wand, because that's how I feel most comfortable. And whenever you're using the magic wand, you need to set the tolerance. And right now the tolerance is set to 32, so if I came in here and click this, notice that it would not make an entire selection around that whole brown area of the mountain. It's missing a lot of information because the tolerance is too low. So I'm going to change the tolerance here to 70. Okay, and I'm going to Command D to deselect this, and I'm going to click it again, and now notice that the entire brown region has been selected just by increasing the tolerance of my magic wand. Okay? All right, so now that we've got that selection, I'm going to use something that you may have, I think you did this in one of your chapters last week. Okay, so you can kind of see, I went ahead and sized that down so you can see the region of the selection there. Basically, it's just this brown mountain. And I want to bring in this, notice over here, I have a second layer called Cloud Sky. So I have a layer called Cloud Sky, and then I have the layer called Clouds and Hill, and that's this layer we're working on right now. Okay, see, notice how I'm clicked on it? Okay, now to drop out the current sky background and bring in this new sky background, we have to do what's called a layer mask. And I'll explain in a minute why you do this over what I showed you last week. Under layer, you pull down to layer mask, and I'm going to go, I believe it's, yes, reveal selection. And if you were watching, okay, I'll do that again. I just did a Command Z for undo. And I'm going to pull down layer, go to layer mask, and reveal selection. Okay? And in that process, what has happened is what was selected stayed the same, but everything else that wasn't selected became transparent, basically, and revealed what was behind it, which was this brand new cloud sky. If you can kind of see here, if I turn off this layer, it's blank back here. It's transparent. It has the checkerboard squares. So if I turn that image back on, now I have substituted that gray sky for a nice bright blue sky. And I haven't actually removed the original sky, so in the event that, let's say I show this to my client, and the client says, no, I kind of like that original sky, I can just come over here, disable this layer mask, and my original sky will come back. Okay, so I just right mouse clicked on that layer mask that we just created, and I disabled it, and I'm going to go ahead and enable it again, and you can see that my new sky has come back. So a really nice feature, the layer mask, and what it does is it allows you to retain information but still be able to mask out what you don't want. So in this case, I wanted to retain the old sky in the event that the client may not like what I did, and if I had to bring it back, I could. So I haven't kind of, I guess, demolished the image. The other thing I wanted to show you real quick is even though we have a layer mask on there, we can still make edits to what is being shown here. And I have an area, I'm just going to kind of zoom up here just a little, of this mountain that I want to hide. You see how there's a little sliver here that I'd like to see sky here instead of this green grass. So I'm going to fix this, okay? And grabbing this, we can move this over so you can sort of see this. I'm going to fix this. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the channels. So over here in the layers, we've been working in layers, and I think they went through channels with you in 3 and 6 when you did those lessons. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to channels. And I'm going to turn on that channel. Now notice I showed you guys last week the quick mask and how to work with that. But this isn't necessarily a quick mask. What this is basically just showing you where the region of the mask that you have created, that layer mask. And you can go ahead and edit this on the fly and have it apply to the layer mask that you've created on the layers panel. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And the way we do that is we select the pencil tool, and I'm going to go ahead and Command plus and I'm holding down my space bar to pan here so that we can kind of see this up close, and my space bar to pan. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to actually paint in some more of this mask. Okay, you see how I did that? I painted in some more red, and I'm using the pencil tool to do that. Now you have to be in the channels and selected on that mask in order to be able to do this. That's important, okay? So if you try and do this in the layers, it will not work. You have to be in channels and you have to be selected on that mask. Okay, once you make that edit, go ahead and turn off that that mask in the channels and go back to layers, and notice now that you have gone ahead and fixed that, and it applied it to your layer mask that you now currently have here. So you didn't actually have to take off the layer mask to make that edit. So now notice that this is the piece that was showing. I went ahead and fixed that. So the layer mask is editable, I guess is what I was trying to show you there, is once you commit to it, it's not something you have to live with for the rest of your life. You could still go back in, you could take things off the mask, you can add things to the mask, you could take the mask off by disabling it and have your original back. It's much more versatile than, say, the situation over here, which is what I showed you last week, where you went in and you just deleted everything in the background, and you cannot get back to that because you've removed it and it's permanently gone. So a layer mask is nice for that reason. It's much more flexible and editable. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, I got 10 minutes to do this shadow demo. I'm trying to time myself here. Okay, so now we've gone ahead and done that. So let's go back over here, click on this, and I'm going to go ahead and, all right, we've got that, we've got that. Okay, so we're all set. What happened here? Okay, oh no, I just got confused. Okay. The other thing that's kind of nice is that if you wanted to, you could move this image as well around, but we're going to go ahead and do that. Yes, you could move this image. No, we're not going to mess with that because right at the moment I want to get through this demo. Okay, so let's talk about the next thing that we are going to do here, and that is down here. Let me go ahead and enlarge this. Okay, I've got this flower that I've brought in. Okay, and if you notice over here in this one, I have, now this is the one that is complete. This is the finished one that we're looking at right now. And I have two layers here. I have one layer that's this flower, and I have another layer that's this shadow behind the flower. So I'll go ahead and turn the shadow off, and you can sort of see that the flower's just kind of sitting there. It looks kind of flat. But if I turn the shadow on, it looks pretty, you know, real. It makes it look believable, like there's actually a flower growing out of the side of that mountain. I mean, it might be a little bit big, but regardless, it is a shadow, and it looks pretty decent. So we're going to go ahead and do that up here. All right, so let's come over here. And to get this image over here into here, I first have to do Command A to do a selection around this whole area right here. Okay. And making sure you're on the Move tool here, you grab and drag that selection into this master document over here. Okay. Now it's going to come in, but it's going to look pretty big. So I already talked about this command. It's Command T for transform, and that gives you the scale box, and then holding down again the shift key to scale this in proportion. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down to fit in the composition here. Okay, so it's kind of like something like that, and I'm going to go ahead and scale this down so that we can get it all into the page here. Okay, so I have something like, let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and the whole time, you can't see me doing this, but I'm holding down the shift key every time I pull one of these handles to maintain the proportions. Okay. All right, and then I hit enter, and I've brought my flower in. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is name that. So let's come over here and name that flower. Okay. All right, then I'm going to right mouse click over here in the layers panel, and I'm going to duplicate that layer. Okay, so duplicate that layer, and this time I'm going to call this shadow. All right. So I have my shadow layer, which is this, okay? And I have my flower layer, which is this. Okay? So this is my shadow and this is my flower. It doesn't look much like a shadow because we haven't done anything with it yet. All we've done is create the layer for it. Okay? So right now, in order to make this work, and looking back at our example that's finished here, you want the shadow to sort of be tucked behind the flower. So we're going to grab the layer of the flower and move it up above the shadow layer. So this is my shadow, which is going to kind of sit behind the flower here. Okay? All right, so let's work on the shadow layer for a few minutes here. Okay, so with it selected, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my command key and I'm going to click on the layer. And make sure when you do that that you click on the icon of the layer itself, or else it won't work. If you click out here in this gray area, it won't work. You have to click on this icon in order for it to make the selection. So right now what it's done by me holding down the command key is selected that piece of art, or that flower, okay? And I'm going to hit delete. Oops, delete, okay? And it has deleted that image and it has left me with an empty selection. Great, that's exactly what I wanted, because what I'm going to do here is add a couple of features to this selection, and we're going to create the shadow from this selection because it mimics the shape of the flower already. So why reinvent the wheel? So the first thing we're going to do is come up here and go to select and drag down to feather. Okay, and I just did this before the lecture, so I determined that for a soft edge, looking down at this example down here, to get this soft edge out here, see how it's kind of like dark and then it feathers out to a light edge? In order to get that, we have to add a feather radius of 45. Now, that may not be what you need, but you may have to play around with the one that works for you. For this particular demo, 45 worked, but you can play around with this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that in there and say OK. And notice how it changed the shape of that selection. But in a minute, you're going to see that that's OK. So once it makes that change, we're going to then go up and we're going to look over here at the, before we go up to here, we're going to go over to your tool panel over here and make sure that in your tools that you have the black swatch as the foreground. If you don't, you can switch these, use this arrow to switch them, make the black as the foreground. Just make sure that's set, and then come up to here and go fill and select foreground here and say OK. And notice over here what has happened is it took that black color and it filled that selection with that black. Now we're going to move that black just slightly underneath. And actually, I don't think I like that selection. I think it's too severe, so I'm going to come back, use my history, and I'm going to take it. I'm going to go back to feather here. Using my history, I went back to, and I cleared out the feather and the fill and everything, and I'm back to where my selection is, and I'm going to play around a little bit with a different value. So I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to go to 35, because I kind of lose the shape of that flower a little too much with the 45. So I'm going to go ahead, maybe that's a little too much as well. I'm going to go back in and go feather, and we'll go 30. What's that? Okay. All right, and then I'm going to come back and do the same thing. I'm going to fill it with my foreground color, and I think I kind of like that a little bit better. And I'm going to drag that over to find the best position for it so that it gives me a shadow behind there. And it looks pretty good. Maybe we need it to be a little, okay. So what I can do is I can hit Command D, and now, voila, by using, okay, what I want to explain here just real quick, I got a few more minutes, is by using the actual selection from the flower, I actually have somewhat of the shape of that flower in my shadow. And you can kind of see how it sort of mimics that. Now, going back to that example that I showed you earlier, where that student created these shadows, he did not use the feather on his shadows, and he probably should have, because these shadows look really hard-edged, and I think shadows are supposed to be kind of feathered on the edge, which is what I was kind of showing you over here, is now we've got that nice feathered edge, and it looks really nice and seamless. So I guess that's my quick down and dirty demo on what to think about in terms of putting your compositions together, how to use layer masks, which can be really helpful in helping you to retain information in case you need to edit or go back, and how to make a feathered drop shadow on an image, which should all be very helpful in helping you to make these things come alive. So that concludes my lecture for today.